The night Vera Odom walked into room 14 of the behavioral health unit, she already knew it was going to be a problem. Not because of the chart, though the chart was bad enough. Not because of the intake notes, which described the patient as non-compliant, agitated, refused baseline vitals. It was the way the hallway felt different near that room. Quieter, like the air had decided to stay back. She pushed the door open anyway. The man inside didn't move. He was sitting in the far corner of the room, not in the chair, not on the bed, but on the floor with his back against the wall. His knees were drawn up. His eyes were already on her before she finished opening the door, tracking her with the flat, patient attention of someone who'd spent a long time watching doors. A dog sat beside him. Not a small dog. A Belgian Malinois with a brindle coat and yellow eyes, wearing a red service vest, pressed so close to the man's side that they looked like one creature with two heads. The dog watched her too. "Mr. Hayden," she said. "Nothing." She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. She didn't go closer. She just stood there, holding the admission folder against her chest, and took a breath. His name was Dennis Hayden, 53 years old. Retired Marine Corps, Force Recon, which was the part of the Corps that most people never heard about and weren't supposed to. 2 deployments to Fallujah, 1 to Helmand. The intake sheet listed his emergency contact as none and his next of kin as not applicable, and someone had written in pencil in the margin, in handwriting she didn't recognize, "No family on record." He'd been brought in by ambulance 2 hours ago. A neighbor had called 911 after finding him sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a strip mall in Glenside, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. He hadn't been doing anything dangerous. He hadn't said anything threatening. He just couldn't get out of the truck. By the time the paramedics arrived, he'd let them open the door. He'd let them take him here. He'd signed the voluntary admission form with the same expression he had now, blank, controlled, like a man who had made a calculation and was following through on it. The dog had come with him. The paramedics had allowed it because the vest said surface animal and because Dennis Hayden had not spoken a single word until one of them tried to separate them, at which point he'd said, very quietly, "That dog stays with me," and something in his voice had made everyone stop. Vera had read all of this standing in the nurse's station 15 minutes ago. Then she'd picked up the folder and walked down the hall. "I'm going to check in on you," she said now, still standing near the door. "Not the full intake, just a check-in. You don't have to move." He looked at her. His eyes were dark and very still. The dog's ears moved, one forward, one back, tracking the sounds of the hallway outside. "Is there anything you need right now?" she asked. "Water, a blanket, whatever." He didn't answer. She nodded like he had. "Okay, I'll be back in about an hour." She left. In the nurse's station, her colleague Bridget was waiting with the expression she always wore when she thought something was about to become someone else's problem. "Administration called," Bridget said. "They want the dog out of the room." "Facility policy." "What facility policy?" "No animals in behavioral health. Something about sanitation. He has a service animal certification. That overrides facility policy. They said it has to be evaluated by the department head before." "Who's the department head on tonight?" Bridget glanced down at the board. "Hollis, he's in a consult until 9. Vera checked the clock. It was 7:42. "Then it's not evaluated yet," she said, "and until it is, the dog stays." Bridget gave her a look that said, "This is going to come back to you," but didn't argue. Vera sat down at her station and pulled up Dennis Hayden's full record. It wasn't long. There were gaps in it that she recognized, the kind that appeared when a person spent years in environments where medical record-keeping was either inaccessible or deliberately avoided. She found a note from a VA clinic in Wilmington dated 3 years ago. Patient declined follow-up, left before assessment completed. Another from an urgent care in Philly 2 years before that. Patient treated for lacerations, right forearm, cause attributed to workplace accident. Patient declined further referral. She sat with that for a while. The lacerations were parallel. The note said workplace accident. There was no workplace listed. She kept reading. At 9:15, Dr. Hollis came out of his consult. He was a compact man in his late 50s with the manner of someone who had once been patient and had run out of it a long time ago. He stopped at the nurse's station, skimmed the board, and then looked at Vera. "Hayden," he said. 14. Yes, the dog. Service animal. Certified. She had the documentation pulled up on her screen and turned the monitor toward him. He barely glanced at it. Our policy, the Americans with Disabilities Act, supersedes facility policy on service animals, she said. The dog stays in the room unless there's a documented medical contraindication for a specific patient, which there isn't one, because the only patient in that room is the handler. Hollis looked at her for a moment. He had a way of pausing that wasn't actually thoughtful. It was the pause of someone deciding whether it was worth the argument. "Get me a fuller intake by morning," he said. "Vitals, assessment, the whole sheet. I'll do what he allows," she said. "He's a voluntary admission. He can refuse. Then document the refusals." "I will." He walked away. Vera turned back to her screen. She went back to room 14 at 10. Dennis Hayden had moved. He was on the bed now, sitting upright with his back against the headboard, still dressed in his clothes, jeans, a long-sleeved Henley, work boots. The dog was on the floor beside the bed, chin on his paws, but watching the door with a precision that suggested he was not actually relaxed. She brought water. She set it on the table beside the bed without saying anything about it. "Long night," she said. He didn't respond. "I'm Vera. I'll be here until 7 a.m. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down, not close, not performing ease. "Just sitting. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to be around." The dog lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes were the color of old amber. "What's his name?" she asked. A long pause. Long enough that she'd already decided he wasn't going to answer. "Kaba," he said. His voice was low and unused sounding, like something that had been in storage. "Kaba," she repeated, not enthusiastically, just acknowledging. "Good name for a Malinois." He looked at her then. Really looked. A flicker of something, recalibration. Like she'd said something that didn't fit the pattern he'd been expecting. "You know the breed," he said. "My uncle worked K9 with the sheriff's department for 12 years. He had a Mal named Bishop. Absolute menace. Loved that dog." Another silence. Different from the first one. Less like a wall, more like a door left slightly ajar. "Kabat was assigned to me," Dennis said after a while. "In theater. Military working dog. We were a team for 4 years. He paused. "When I got out, I filed for adoption. Took 14 months and 3 lawyers, but..." He looked down at the dog. "He's been with me 9 years now. That's a long partnership," Vera said. "Yeah." She didn't push. She just sat. Outside in the hallway, someone was rolling a cart past, and the wheels made a rhythmic metallic sound, and she watched Dennis's hands, flat on his thighs, still, but the tendons visible, and she watched them go still again as the sound faded. "The intake," he said. "I know I owe you the intake." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me take your blood pressure at some point tonight." "That's it. Everything else is voluntary." He looked at her again with that same recalibrating expression. "The last facility I was at," he said, "they tried to sedate me on intake. Before I'd said 3 words. She didn't say that's terrible or I'm so sorry. She said, 'What facility?' VA 66 in Philly 4 years ago. She filed it away. 'That's not happening here,' she said. 'Nothing happens without your consent. If anyone tells you otherwise, you come get me directly. How am I supposed to come get you if I don't know where you are?' Fair point." She stood up, went to the whiteboard on the wall. Every room had one, for care team names, and wrote Vera Oswald, Room 8 Station, XD 32 Forn. Then she turned around. "Now you know where I am." He stared at the board. Then, very quietly, he said, "Okay." At 2 in the morning, the situation changed. Vera was charting when she heard the voices from the hallway near room 14. She was up before she'd made a conscious decision to stand. 2 people outside the door. One of them was Bridget. The other was a man in a facilities management uniform she didn't recognize, middle-aged, heavy-set, carrying a clipboard. The door to room 14 was open. "Policy is clear," the man was saying, "and I've been asked by Dr. Hollis's office." "Dr. Hollis is gone," Vera said, walking up. Both of them turned. "Dr. Hollis went home at midnight. I'm the primary contact for this patient." She looked at the clipboard. "What's the issue?" The man, his badge said K. Faber, Facilities Operations, straightened. "We've had a complaint from the unit above. Apparently, the animal has been vocalizing, pacing. It's been flagged as a disturbance. Kabat has been in that room for 6 hours and hasn't made a sound," Vera said. "I've been 20 feet away the entire night." Faber looked at his clipboard. The complaint was logged at 1:58 a.m. "I'll check the hallway camera timestamp," she said. "If there's documentation of a disturbance, I'd like to see it." He blinked. People in facilities operations were not usually challenged to produce camera timestamps at 2 in the morning. The service animal stays, she said, per ADA guidelines, which I've already walked through with Dr. Hollis. If you'd like to escalate, the on-call administrator is Dr. Prentice, and her extension is 4401. She handed him a sticky note she'd written nothing on, just held it out, making the gesture of giving him something to take away. He took it on reflex. Is there anything else? Faber looked at Bridget. Bridget looked at the floor. No, he said. Okay, have a good night. She waited until he was around the corner, then turned to Bridget. Who called facilities? She asked. Bridget crossed her arms. I don't know, you don't know, or you don't want to say? A pause. I don't want to say. Vera looked at her for a moment. Bridget, that man in there came here voluntarily. He signed the forms, he cooperated with transport, he's been cooperative with me tonight. If we make it so that people like him can't come here without having their legal accommodations challenged at 2 in the morning, they stop coming, and then they don't go anywhere. They just sit in parking lots until something worse happens. She kept her voice even, not angry, factual. Is that what we're trying to accomplish? Bridget didn't answer. Vera said, I'm going to check on my patient. She knocked before entering. Dennis was awake. He'd heard everything. The walls were thin, and she hadn't lowered her voice because she hadn't thought she needed to. He was sitting up, and Cabot was standing now, pressed against his leg, and Dennis's hand was on the dog's head in a way that looked less like petting and more like grounding, using the dog the way a person uses a fixed point when the world is tilting. It's handled, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Why, he said. Why what? Why are you doing this? His voice had changed. It was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something raw underneath it, like a frequency just below what she was supposed to hear. Nobody does this. Not for, he stopped. Started again. I've been in 6 facilities in the last 8 years. VA, civilian, inpatient, outpatient. And what I've learned is that the first 24 hours tell you everything you need to know about whether the place is actually going to. He stopped again. Actually going to help, she finished. He looked away. Out the window. There was nothing outside, just the dark and the faint reflection of the room. My sergeant, he said after a moment, when we were in Helmand, first week, there was a situation, doesn't matter what, but afterward he sat down with every man in the unit individually and said, I see you. Whatever you need, I'm going to try to get it for you, and he meant it. Every word. He paused. I've spent 12 years looking for someone in a civilian building who means it the same way. Vera was quiet. Then she said, I can't promise you I'll fix everything. I'm a night nurse on a behavioral health unit in a mid-size hospital in Pennsylvania, and there are limits to what I can do before 7 a.m. She paused. But I mean it. Every word. He looked at her. Cabot lay back down and put his head on Dennis's boot. The morning shift started at 7, and with it came Dr. Harmon. Dr. Neil Harmon was the senior psychiatrist for the unit, a man who had the particular quality of being technically competent and fundamentally incurious, which in Vera's experience was one of the more dangerous combinations in medicine. He arrived at 7:20, reviewed the charts, and came to find her before she'd finished her handoff notes. The Hayden case, he said. Yes, incomplete intake. No vitals baseline, no formal assessment. He's a voluntary patient. He declined portions of the intake. I documented each refusal and the reason being, he has a significant history of adverse experiences with clinical settings. He agreed to allow blood pressure and pulse ox at 0400, which I completed, both within normal range. He declined the psychiatric assessment last night, and I recommended we offer it again this morning when he'd had time to rest. Harmon looked at the chart. The dog, service animal, certified, ADA compliant. Dr. Hollis reviewed the documentation. Dr. Hollis also left a note expressing concern about the facility's liability exposure from following federal accommodation law. He gave her a look that said, don't do that. I'm going to recommend we transfer the animal to an approved boarding facility during the assessment period. He won't consent to that. He can be persuaded. He's a voluntary patient, she said, for the second time in 8 hours to the second different person. He cannot be coerced. And if he feels coerced, he will leave AMA, and given what I know about his history, leaving AMA from this facility at this moment could. She stopped herself, rephrased. It would not be a good outcome. Harmon studied her. You've spent one night with this patient. Yes. And you've formed a clinical opinion based on the chart, which documents 12 years of trauma history, 6 prior incomplete treatment attempts, a pattern of institutional avoidance, and the fact that last night was the first time he's voluntarily presented to any facility in 4 years. She kept her voice professionally level and let the content of the words do the work. The reason he came here instead of leaving that parking lot and going back to his apartment is the same reason he's still here this morning. If we break that, we might not get another opportunity. A silence. I'll conduct the assessment myself, Harmon said finally, and I'll make my own clinical determination about the animal. Of course, she said. I'd ask that you review the intake notes I wrote about communication approaches that have been effective before you go in. He didn't say he would. He also didn't say he wouldn't. She stayed past her shift. She wasn't supposed to. She'd been on since 7 the previous evening, and hospital policy recommended a minimum turnaround of 10 hours. But she told the charge nurse she needed to finish her documentation, which was true, and she sat at her station and listened. She heard Harmon go into room 14. She heard the door close. She timed 12 minutes before it opened again. 12 minutes was not enough time for a meaningful psychiatric assessment of a patient with Dennis Hayden's history. She was already standing when Harmon came down the hall. I'm going to recommend a different placement, he said when he reached her. This unit isn't equipped to manage. What did he say? She asked. Harmon paused. In the room, she said, in 12 minutes. What did he say? He was uncooperative. He was uncooperative, or he was guarded, which is not the same thing as Oswald. 12 minutes isn't an assessment. 12 minutes is an introduction. She said it calmly, because she'd learned over 6 years that the moment she stopped sounding calm was the moment the argument became about her tone instead of about the patient. I spent 3 hours with him last night. He talked to me. He told me about his service. He told me about Cabot. He allowed me to take his vitals. That doesn't happen with a patient who is uncooperative. That happens with a patient who is frightened and needs more time than 12 minutes. Harmon's expression shifted into something she recognized. The particular arrangement of features that preceded the sentence "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing this for 22 years, he said. I know, she said. That's why I'm asking you to give him the benefit of what you've learned. Another silence. Longer this time. I'll give him until the afternoon assessment, he said finally. If he doesn't engage meaningfully by then, I'm recommending transfer. Thank you, she said, genuinely. He walked away. She sat back down at the station and put her face in her hands for just a moment, not long, just the 3 seconds it took to exhale. Then she stood up, walked down the hall, and knocked on the door of room 14. Dennis was sitting in the chair now, not the floor, not the bed. Cabot was pressed against his side, half on the chair with him, one heavy paw draped across his knee. The morning light came in at a low angle through the window and caught the dog's coat and made it look like something from a painting. Dennis looked at her. He looked tired in the way that went past physical, the kind of tired that had accumulated over years rather than a single sleepless night. You stayed, he said. I had paperwork. He almost smiled. Not quite, but the shape of it was there around his eyes. The doctor, he said. He wants me gone. He wants you assessed. There's a difference. She sat down in her usual chair. I told him you needed more time, and he listened to you? He gave you until this afternoon. Dennis was quiet. He looked down at Cabot's paw on his knee. He turned it over in his palm. Not the paw, the idea of it. I was in a VA facility in 2019, he said. 3 days in, they separated Cabot. Said it was temporary, just while they ran a group session. He was gone for 6 hours. He paused. 6 hours. I've been in situations, in theater, actual kinetic situations, where I was less afraid than I was in those 6 hours. That shouldn't have happened, she said. No. He looked up at her. It shouldn't have. And the reason it happened is because nobody in that building was paying attention. They had a protocol, and they ran the protocol, and I was just the variable that had to fit into it. He stopped. I'm not easy. I know that. I'm not. He made a gesture that seemed to mean cooperative, compliant, straightforward. I have a lot of... I know it's hard to. Dennis, she said. He stopped. You don't have to be easy, she said. That's not a requirement for care. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. The morning sounds of the hospital were starting to build. The shift changeovers, the carts, the voices of people beginning their day. What do I need to do, he said, to stay here, to actually try this? She thought about it honestly. Let Dr. Harmon try again this afternoon. Actually try, not just be in the room, but try to talk to him. She paused. And if he does something wrong, or something that feels like what happened in 2019, you tell me and I will address it directly. Not through the system, not on a form, directly. You're still here at afternoon? I come back at 7 tonight. He nodded slowly. Then he said, what's the thing you said to the guy last night about going back to the apartments? She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I heard you, he said. In the hall. You said that they stop coming. And then they don't go anywhere. They just sit in parking lots until something worse happens, she said. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in that parking lot a lot of times, he said. Last night was just the first time I couldn't make myself leave it. She sat with that. She let it be what it was without wrapping it in language. I'm glad you couldn't, she said finally. He nodded once, a small, careful nod. Cabot pushed his nose into Dennis's palm. Dennis closed his hand around the dog's muzzle gently. Automatically, the way you hold something you're used to holding. The afternoon assessment took 47 minutes. Vera wasn't there for it. She was home technically, though she'd set an alarm for 5 p.m. and checked her phone twice before it went off. When she came back in at 7, she stopped at the charge desk first. The night nurse looked up. Your guy in 14 had a 2-hour session with Harmon this afternoon. Vera blinked. 2 hours. Harmon cleared his schedule. The nurse, Josie, who'd been on the unit for 11 years and had seen everything, gave her a look that was approximately admiration, though the unit's culture didn't quite allow for expressing it directly. Whatever you said to him this morning, I just gave him the chart information. Well, Josie looked back at her screen. The dog's been officially approved as an in-room accommodation. Harmon signed it himself. It's in the file. Vera walked down the hall to room 14. She knocked. The voice that said come in was quieter than before, still controlled, but something had shifted in the register of it. Less like a door that had been welded shut, more like a door that had been closed and locked, but now had a key somewhere nearby. Dennis was in the chair. Cabot was on his side on the floor, legs stretched, truly asleep for what was possibly the first time since they'd arrived. The dog looks comfortable, she said. Yeah. Dennis looked at him with an expression that was private and worn smooth with familiarity. He always knows before I do. She sat down in her chair. Harmon, she said. 2 hours. Dennis was quiet for a moment. He came back in and said he'd read your notes. He paused. Said I should know that the nurse on the previous shift had flagged several concerns about my admission experience and wanted me to know that those concerns were being taken seriously at a departmental level. Vera didn't say anything. Is that true? He asked. The flagging? Yes. He looked at her. Why didn't you tell me you were doing that? Because you didn't need to worry about the administrative side. You needed to focus on the assessment. He was quiet again. Then he asked me about the parking lot. Harmon. He asked me what I was thinking about when the neighbor found me. What did you tell him? A long pause. I told him I was trying to remember if there was a reason to get out of the truck. He said it flatly, without drama, the way you say something that has been true for a long time and has stopped being surprising. And I couldn't think of one. I knew there should be one. I just couldn't find it. And now? She asked. He looked at the dog, at Cabot sleeping, his legs twitching slightly with whatever dogs dream. Now there's something I'm supposed to be here for, he said. The session tomorrow, the one after that. He paused. Harmon said there's a veteran-specific group on Thursdays. Peer facilitated. Half of them bring their animals. He said this last part carefully, like he was testing how it sounded. Cabot would be perfect, she said. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile, exactly. But the architecture of something that could become one, given enough time, given enough of this. Enough rooms where the nurse didn't leave, enough nights where the dog stayed, enough mornings where the next door opened, and someone on the other side meant it. You're going to be okay, she said. And then, before he could deflect or distance or do any of the things that men like him had learned to do when someone said something true and direct, not all the way fixed, not tonight, but okay. He held her gaze for a moment. Yeah, he said. Outside the window, the lights of the hospital parking lot were coming on in the early dark, one by one, the way lights do when the day has finally decided it's done and something quieter is allowed to take over. Cabot stirred in his sleep, stretched one paw out, and went still again, and Dennis Hayden sat in his chair in room 14 of the behavioral health unit and breathed slowly, in and out, the way a man breathes when he has, after a very long time, decided that breathing is worth continuing.